Hey everybody, this is Alex Fabrega coming at you again with another Teaching Tips Tuesday. We have finished our series on how visual impairments impact child development, so now we're moving back into our normal Teaching Tips Tuesday flow. Today I have with me Collin Montoya. He's a Braille instructor here at the Foundation for Blind Children. How are you doing today, Collin?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you for asking. So a question that I get a lot is just Braille. It's sort of a vague question. I feel like everybody knows what it is, but nobody knows where it comes from. And I know you have a lot of experience in the Braille production side of things, so I figured it'd be perfect to come on and talk about it.
Yeah. I think we all get that question in this field of just how does something go from this sometimes a tiny little textbook to this massive like 30 volume book.
Yeah.
What the process is, why it takes the amount of time that it does. And there are a lot of ways to answer that question.
Yeah. All right, well, let's start at the beginning then. Let's say I'm a TVI, because I am a TVI. I just got a brand new student in my caseload, and I just got their textbook requirements for the next year. So I come to you with this big stack of textbooks, and I say, Collin, please help me turn these into Braille. What are our first steps?
First step is to take the textbook that you've just given us, and we need to get some sort of file that we can transcribe. There are different sorts of resources. The NIMAC, so NIMUS files, are ones that are produced by publishers. Those files are available through the NIMAC. We tend to take the textbook, we will physically chop it, much to the chagrin of some of our districts. We'll scan it in, and from there we'll do OCR, or optical character recognition. That is a program that just takes the scan, looks at it and says, is there text in this file, and starts to try and read it for us. It's not exact. Most of the time it's pretty close. From there, we take that file, send it off to a transcriber, and they will sort of begin the actual work of turning it into a Braille-ready file or another thing that can be printed on an embosser.
Okay. Now, when you talk about transcriptions, I know that we in Arizona have an interesting transcription program where we actually use prisoners to do some Braille transcription.
We do. So the Prison Braille program is one that actually is national. So a few states have a similar program. I think we're one of the largest. I'm hoping, fingers crossed. But we have 6 prisons that are part of our prison program. They are all certified transcribers or in the process of learning Braille. We'll typically send them files over CD, via email to the corrections officers, and they'll begin their transcription process. One of the prison programs is actually a production center as well. So once we send them the files that we need transcribed, they have the ability to transcribe them, proofread them, produce them, and just mail all of the completed volumes back to us.
One-stop shop. That's a pretty good deal.
Yeah.
All right. So let's say that's not what happened. They did the transcription, then you get your file sent back. Then what happens?
Once we get the files back, if they haven't been proofread, most contractors that we work with have the ability to proofread themselves. Some of the prison programs don't, depending on how long they've been around or who's in that unit. Once it's proofread, we can send it over to an embosser, which is more or less, in our instance, a Braille, which is a mini fridge-sized, essentially printer that just punches dots into some of the Braille paper on tractor feed to be able to produce these books. If there are any images in the books that needed to be transcribed, that's not exactly a one-to-one transcription, we have to run them on a separate embosser, a little bit smaller, but is able to make some of the more nuanced images. I actually have one here.
Yeah, let's take a peek. We call these tactile graphics in the biz.
Yep. So this tactile graphic here, it's a little hard to get it to show up. We have a cylinder right here that is being bisected by a plane that runs along this way. So the plane is shaded in, the cylinder is not. And you can see just this sort of circle in the middle here that is being hit by that plane. Each graphic in a book has to take up its own individual page. So books like geometry, math books, a lot of things that use images and angles and that kind of thing take up a lot more space than other books. And these tactile images take usually a little bit longer to print. Since they're being produced on a separate embosser than the actual text of a document, those have to be put together by hand. And then once that's done, we are ready to bind it, label it, and ship it out, either to, in this instance, it would be you and your student, or we also sell other things to other instructional resource centers around the nation. So we could also sell that to a customer depending on the need.
Excellent. Now, I think it's worth covering the historical perspective because we in the field did not always have these wonderful embossers. So how was Braille produced pre-embosser?
So pre-embosser, it was a much more time-inducing, wow.
What is the, I can't think, time intensive.
Yes.
I think we're all good. Yeah.
It was a much more time-consuming process. Originally, when you first got a Braille book, somebody would sit down with the book in front of them, look at it, and then turn over to their left to a Braille writer, a specifically like specialized typewriter that produces Braille.
Yep.
And they would physically, letter by letter, black it out. There's no translation help with that like there is with computers in the modern day.
Nope.
It certainly takes a lot longer to typewrite anything, as anyone who's used a typewriter knows. And usually that would wind you up with a master copy. From there, you could make copies of that using thermoform, which is essentially a sheet of specialized plastic that you could melt down onto that, and you would produce a similar tactile copy, but that would still be page by page from the master copy.
Thermoforming, yeah.
Yep, and each page probably takes somewhere around 30 seconds, because you have to put it into the specialized machine, shut it, count to like 10 for it to melt properly, and then pull it off, prepare the next one.
And you were telling me that even before that, they had to like manually paint on a layer of shellac onto Braille and then like peel off the shellac.
Yep, you'd create a very thin layer so that you could still feel the dots once it was covered, and then you'd have to wait almost an entire day and physically peel it off before you had a complete semblance of a book.
I am very glad not to be a TVI in that era. That sounds brutal. And then even before the Perkins Braille writer, we had an even more archaic way of producing Braille, the slate and stylus. Do you have one of those to show the folks?
Let me see. I do. So a slate and stylus would look something like this. This is for a smaller book, but there are some that go out much farther. And as many sort of TVIs know, it is punching each individual dot in this sort of framed outline here. And you have to not only know Braille, but you have to know Braille backwards so that it reads the correct way when you're done.
If my Braille tutor here to say that, she'd be very disappointed. She always say you're just thinking of going right to left instead of going backwards because you'll get more confused. But that's neither here nor there. All right, well, thank you so much for giving us this picture on how Braille is produced now and how it's been produced through the ages. I think this will answer a lot of people's questions.
You're welcome. I'm glad to have been able to answer some of those.
And I have one more question that I always like to ask my guests, and that is, what is your favorite part of your job?
My favorite part of my job is that moment where usually a teacher will come in at the very end of the day and after they've picked up a new book or something like that, they will say something to the effect of, my student got it. Just they understand the concept that we've been working on or we've been trying to figure out, and whether that's because of the tactiles or part of the book that we helped produce. Just a student finally understanding something and working towards it and getting it is what we are all about. So that process is really what brings a light to our day.
Absolutely. Well, we in the TVI world would have no ability to do our job whatsoever if there were not incredible Braille instructors and Braille technicians like you guys over in the Media Center. So we appreciate that so much. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on again, Collin. And thank you so much to the folks at home for watching another episode of Teaching Tips Tuesday. As always, if you have any comments or questions that you want to see addressed, please leave them in the comments. I will try and find an expert who can talk us through it. And I hope to see you next week.